So good morning, David. Nice
Morning.
to have you here in our YouTube channel. How are you doing?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
So here we are with David Fullmer. He is my fellow colleague at GPSLA, an organization that is trying to bring executive and organizations to the US, in particular to the West Coast. David and I, we've been working together for a long time, and I can tell the audience that it's one of the most reputed immigration lawyers I've ever met, and has brought a lot of executives from organizations all over the world to the US. So today we're gonna try to have some foundations about different type of visas and immigrations laws that are taking place, to get more familiar with how, what are the options that someone from overseas has to come to the States, right, and join this market. Sounds that like a good plan, David?
Yeah, it sounds like a great plan. Do you have any particular area or visa that you want to start with?
Sure. I think the easiest would be to actually have an overall understanding of what would be the type of visas and that someone from any part of the world they could have. I know that we have a specific treaty, that the US has specific treaties with some parts of the world.
Right.
But if you can give us a general overview of all the different options, that would be great.
You bet. Most visas are initiated or petitioned by an employer. And so in most cases, you do need, an individual would need a US employer to obtain a visa. And there are various different scenarios. One scenario is where an individual is working at a company overseas, and they're some type of a manager or specialist. Now, when I say overseas, I mean outside of the United States. Somebody's working for a big organization outside of the United States. If they have a branch or subsidiary inside of the United States, then a visa called an L1 could be a possibility. And there are two different types of L1s. There's L1A for managers and L1B for specialists. That's a really good visa. It's one of the first things we think of when somebody's working for an international organization. And I know you've dealt with executives who have used L1s as well, right, Javi?
Yeah, actually, myself, when I arrived here to the States in 2014, I came through a L1 visa.
Yeah, L1s are great. They also transition well into permanent residency in the United States if someone is seeking for that, or if the company needs the person to stay.
Like turning into a green card, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're working for an international organization, you should really look at an L1. If not, there are other options depending on where you might be in your career. There's a visa called a J1 visa. And the J1 visa is generally for trainees or interns. It's for young people who are just starting their career. Usually they would need to have a degree or 5 years experience in their field, but still pretty young.
You have to be under 26, right? Or
generally there's not a specific age limit. I've seen people anywhere under 35 still get that, but it's usually less, under 30. Usually for pretty new graduates. And again, they do need an employer in the US that wants them to come and do an internship or traineeship. They can come for 1 year or 18 months. So it's a short-term thing. But sometimes it's a good way for a young person to get some experience in the United States. Spouse can come along, spouse can get a work permit and work in the US during this short period. So you've got this J1 visa for people who are really kind of early in their career. Then there's something else called an O1, O like octopus, O1, and that's for individuals who are really at the top of their career. They're recognized experts in their field. And these people can also be petitioned by, you still need a US employer. They can come to the US and work without having to worry about this notorious H1B lottery. And that's for the people right in the middle. So, the young people who can come as trainees, really high-end people can come, and the O1s. And for the people in the middle of their career with a degree in a specific area generally have to go through the H1B visa, which means they have to go through a lottery. kind of crazy. Like, why would the United States of America be deciding who gets a visa with a lottery? Well, they're doing it because the US Congress has only authorized 85,000 new visas every year. And many multiples of that apply every year. So they have to run a lottery. They do it every March. And then in April, they select 85,000 people. And those are the people who whose companies can get their H1 visa for them. Just to give you an idea, this year, for 85,000 slots, there were like 750,000 applicants.
Wow.
Yeah.
And for that visa in particular, does the employer needs to sponsor you at all, or it's just basically you can just
the employer
do it
right
by
now,
yourself?
the way the system is set up, the employer has to file a very simple application in March to enter someone in a lottery. The employer pays a $10 filing fee. Then they conduct the lottery in April and select 85,000. What happened this time around that hasn't happened before is that it appears that there were about 90,000 people who were sponsored by multiple companies, 3 or 4 companies. So that skewed the results of the lottery. So now the government is looking at how they're going to fix that. So for most, if you're somebody who's a professional who's sitting overseas and wants to work in the US, H1B probably is not a great option. That's why we're talking about other options. Now, Avi, you mentioned certain countries do have treaties with the United States. So let's mention those. If you're from one of 5 countries, you do not have to go through the lottery, because there are special visas based on bilateral treaties with the United States. So those are Canada and Mexico. People from Canada and Mexico can get a special professional worker visa called a TN visa, no lottery. Australians can get a special treaty visa called an E3, no lottery. And then Singapore and Chile, they can each get another special visa called H1B1 without having to go through the lottery. But if you're not from one of those countries, you're kind of lumped into having to get something else. Now, you mentioned you wanted to talk a little bit about entrepreneurs today. If you want, we can talk a little bit about that.
Well, before we get into that, I also heard about there's a lot of international executives that come to me, and they also asked me about the trainings or studies. Is there any visa or work permit that you can get through an MBA or through any type of training in the United States?
That's a really good question. The US has what's called an F1 student visa. It's available for someone who you have to first obtain admission to a university in the United States. The university has to be a university that handles student visas. Most good universities do handle student visas. And so the university will issue a certificate called Form I-20. Then the individual can get their student visa at the US consulate and come here and study until they complete the program. And when they complete the program, then they get 1 year work permit. It's called OPT, which stands for Optional Practical Training. In a way, it's similar to this J1 visa that we talked about. It allows the graduate to come work for 1 year after graduation in their field. Now, if they studied something in the STEM area, which means science, technology, engineering, or math, and if they're working for the right kind of employer, then they can get a 2-year extension of their OPT. So that means 3 years working in the US with no work visa, no lawyers, no big legal fees, but they do need an employer. So that's a very good question. Some MBA programs focus on technology, and so the government deems them to be STEM degrees, and they qualify for the full 3 years. And then
once they get throughout the OPT, they could be sponsored through an H1, or as it go through lottery, the companies try to sponsor them from day one, right? Or how?
Right, yeah. What I normally see is companies will start putting these particular employees into the H1B lottery every year, starting the first of their 3 years of OPT and STEM OPT. And back before the lottery was really kind of skewed because of some problems they had this year. Usually people would get selected in one of the first 3 tries. Another thing that some employers do is early on in this 3 years, they try to sponsor someone for permanent residency through a process called PERM. It's where the employer goes through the Department of Labor's labor market test to prove that there are no qualified US workers. And sometimes people can get through the whole PERM and green card process during the 3 years of OPT and STEM OPT.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, let's go deep into the or more. Let's navigate into the entrepreneurial
Okay.
world. There's a lot of people that they want to explore the US market to start their own business. What options do they have?
They have some very good options. I've dealt with a lot of tech entrepreneurs from the US and from overseas. And if you're from overseas, if you're from one of numerous countries that has an E2 treaty with the United States, then you can get this E2 visa. E2 visa is, for most countries, it's valid for 5 years, and it allows the entrepreneur to come to the United States to make an investment, open a business, hire US workers, and allows the spouse and children to come with. Spouse gets an automatic open work permit. And so it could be very good for a situation where you've got a couple where one person's an entrepreneur and the other person wants to explore the opportunities in the corporate world in the United States. It also allows the family to diversify because you can have two incomes, one based on the entrepreneur, the other person maybe is an executive at a local company. And so E2 is a great option. The requirements are that the entrepreneur needs to make a substantial investment in the United States. People always ask me, David, what's substantial? The law doesn't say what substantial is. People say, well, David, what's the least possible? I've seen people get visas with a $100,000 investment, maybe a little bit less. But usually people invest quite a bit more, a couple $100,000 at least.
So there's no set amount. It's kind of it has a lot of components that get into place.
There's no set amount. The amount has to be substantial based on the type of business they're in.
Okay.
Then they do have to hire US workers. And then they have to deploy the investment funds into the United States. But it's a great option. The reason I like e-visas is because with these other visas, you're kind of like hunting for an employer, begging somebody to hire you, asking somebody to sponsor you. And with an E2 visa, you don't have to worry about any of that. You can take it into your own hands. You set up a business in the US or purchase a business, make the investment, and then you can bring you and your family to the US and your spouse can work. So it's very interesting for some people.
Yeah, that's definitely very important because most of the times we only think about the executive that is coming in, but sometimes we forget about the spouse who's coming with him or with her. And yeah, there's some limitations on the different visas, right? When it comes to a spouse, some of the visas allow the spouse to work, but some of the visas they don't. Is that
That's
correct?
Right. That's right. And you might have a scenario, Javi, where you've got this executive. Maybe he's worked in the corporate world in Europe, and he wants to work in the U.S. And none of these visas fit. And so one idea is, let's say he's married and his spouse has not really been working too much, but the spouse, let's say it's the wife, she could be the one who invests, and say she invests $250,000 and she sets up a small restaurant or a yogurt stand. Okay, she sets up a small business, hires some workers. She could get the E2 visa as the principal investor. Then her husband would get the open work permit. Then he could pursue opportunities as an executive in the United States without having to ask for visa sponsorship. So it can work both ways.
I think one of the questions that a lot of companies have is, so I have some business and operations in the US. I need to bring some of my international executives to the US to deal with clients. Obviously there's going to be a point where we need to set up a corporation, but then if we don't have it, but if you have it, what's the moment where, well, first of all, can international executives work under B1 or ESTA permits? And then if so, when is the right moment to say, okay, let's consider other options more than the ESTA and the B1? Because basically we have, more business in the States. Like, what are your general recommendations for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most countries have ESTA, so they don't necessarily, need B visas as long as the period of stay is 90 days or less. So these foreign executives, they can come to the United States as a representative of the non-US business, do all kinds of things. They can come to meet clients. They can come to make sales on behalf of the, the non-US business.
But you can say that in the port of entry, right? Whenever you're
right, yes. So, we're a company based in Spain. I'm the sales manager. I'm coming to talk to a potential client about some potential business, and no problem.
Okay.
You can come to do market research and many other things. Now, it becomes a little bit tricky when they set up a US subsidiary, because this foreign executive really shouldn't be coming to make a sale on behalf of the US company. Then he's basically working for a US company. And so he can come, the non-US executive can come to have some meetings with the executives in the US, can come to take them out to dinner and to meet them and to have team building events, but he shouldn't be running the US business. They'll need to have, local US talent hired to do that, or maybe people on work visas hired to do that. So once it gets to the point where the person really is doing work on behalf of a US company, then they'll need a visa, something like an L1.
Like an L1 would be the, even though it might be for someone who don't want to live in the States, but wants to come back and forth.
Right. I've had situations where, there's a big company, maybe the CEO of the whole group is based outside of the United States, and he needs to come to the US only 2 or 3 times a year. But when he comes, he needs to kind of hunker down, sit in an office and run the whole operation from the US office. For that person, I would still get an L1, because what they're doing is way beyond the realms of a B1 business visitor. So yeah, even if they're only coming a few times a year, even if they're not spending that long, if they're doing work in the US and not just kind of transacting a business deal, then I would get them an L1 visa.
Then, you get an executive that wasn't sponsored by employer. He or she gets in the States, but obviously he or she is under a visa that sometimes it could be a very limiting when it comes to look for other jobs. So when can an executive or a company sponsor sponsor the executive to get the green card? How long does the process take? And then what are the potential implications of going from a visa to green card?
Yeah, those are good questions. They come up a lot. Most green card applications for people who are here on work visas, the applications are initiated by the employer. So the employer is totally in control. And so it really depends on what the employer's goals might be. For an international executive who is transferred from, let's say, from Europe, maybe the company wants them to work in the US only for a few years and then go back. So they might not be willing to sponsor them for a green card. Sometimes there's some negotiation. The employee gets to the United States, they like it, so now they've got to ask the employer to do it. So the employer can do it whenever they want. If somebody comes on an L1 visa, an employer could potentially start from day one, or they could wait a few years. It's fully up to them. What I've seen for companies who hire locally, let's say they hire H1B workers in the United States, generally they're starting the green card application process sometime within the first year. It could be earlier in the first year, say after 3 months or 6 months, or it could be after 1 year. So again, it all depends on the employer and what they need to do to be able to attract good workers. You asked how long it would take. It really depends on which category, but it's not going to happen immediately. I would say for most categories, for people who are not from backlog countries, there's a special backlog for India, China, the Philippines, and Mexico. They have a really long waiting list. So if somebody's not from one of those countries, it might take 2 or 3 years to get permanent residency.
Mm-hmm. And how much would the cost would be for an executive by him or herself, and then for the executive plus the family?
Well, it's hard for me to really quote fees in a scenario like this, because every case is different. for us, if we worked with the company for a long time, we brought several people over on L1 visas, and we understand the relationship between the foreign company and the US company. We understand all the roles in the United States, and so the fees will be a little bit lower. When working with a new company, fees are a little bit higher. One thing I can say is that as an immigration attorney, most immigration attorneys do work on a flat fee or fixed fee basis as opposed to hourly, where most other lawyers in the United States work on an hourly basis. And so you don't know what it's going to cost. The way that my firm and most immigration firms work is that they'll tell you up front, they'll analyze the project, they'll get an understanding of what it is, and then they'll quote a fee inside a contract to do a specific service for a specific fee.
Yeah, so it will, the relationship that the company who sponsored has had in the past with the states will actually determine a lot the overall budget for the operation, right?
Definitely.
Okay. And then the last question is, we've seen after the pandemic and during the pandemic that there were a lot of countries who actually got into the remote worker visa to attract talent, diversify the talent pool for a lot of organizations, also have potential investors in the country, and they are different countries in Europe, in Latin America, they are giving what we call the remote worker visa. Mm-hmm. What is the perception overall in the United States with that visa, and what is your opinion, or what trends have you seen, if any, during the pandemic in changing, or opening new options for, international executives who does not, need that much, basically computer, Wi-Fi, and a place to work, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the pandemic changed our whole view of what you need to do to work. It used to think that you had to go into an office and sit there with your boss looking over your shoulder every day. And now we know if you have Wi-Fi and a computer, you can work from anywhere. And so attitudes inside of the United States have changed. And obviously, the United States has a lot of beautiful places. Looks like you're in a beautiful place right now, probably by the beach. Javi, and
very close by indeed.
Yeah. And so people ask me all the time, David, does the US have a digital nomad visa? And unfortunately, we don't. And so the US law is a little bit behind in that aspect. So let's say you're from Spain and you have a laptop and you have a job and your employer doesn't care where you work. Can you come to the US and check into a hotel in Miami or Los Angeles and sit on the beach and do your job? Well, yes, you can sit on the beach, and probably nobody will be checking to seeing what you're doing on your laptop or your phone. But if you told the immigration officer at the airport, I'm coming to work remotely from the US for 3 months, they probably would not let you in. That's not the purpose of an ESTA or B1, B2. It's primarily to come and be a visitor for pleasure or do a business transaction on behalf of the foreign employer, not to come and just do your regular day job in the United States. Now, the US is behind, and I hope that they do eventually open up something like a digital nomad visa, but I haven't really seen any serious proposals about it yet.
Mm-hmm. So David, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I think our goal here in Bedford and Bailey and GPS LA is to educate people about the different options that they have to start a business or a career in the US. I definitely feel that your testimonial is going to be of great help to a lot of companies and executives who have that idea. And hopefully, this is the first of many conversations we have, because I'm sure that your recommendation advice it's going to be great for a lot of potential newcomers to the States.
Thank you, Javi. And I know that your services also are going to be very useful for both US and international companies.
We'll be in touch, David. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Enjoy the weekend. Bye.
Bye.